Another grand slam by Brandon Nimmo got the Mets bats going early. Pete Alonso kept them going with 2 more home runs, and the Mets cruised to a Subway Series win over the Yankees.
You are Locked On Mets, your daily New York Mets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello to all you amazing Mets fans. You're watching Locked On Mets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Ryan Finkelstein. I've been covering the New York Mets on this show since the 2019 season. This is the only podcast that covers the Mets 7 days a week throughout the regular season. If you want to find any of my written work, you can do so over at justbaseball.com, where I work as the managing editor. What a difference a week makes. Last weekend, I was previewing the Mets series against the Pirates, and I was talking about how the Pirates were one of the worst offensive teams in baseball, how the Mets had a pitching edge in almost every single game, how they were in first place after winning those 2 games against the Braves to close out their 4-game set. And I was just looking at the road ahead and thought, all right, this is a chance for the Mets to stay in first place in the National League East. And then it ends up being one of the most embarrassing weekends of baseball in franchise history based on run differential. And so we watched that play out. It's time to play the Brewers. Didn't know what to think about the Mets going up against a Brewers team that was red hot. Previewed that series. I don't know. This one looks tough for the Mets. If they can just get it to a rubber match with David Peterson on Thursday, maybe they have a chance to win. And they did that. And David Peterson won the rubber match. The Mets win a series. But I still wasn't all the way back in on the Mets that they were playing great baseball, and all of the woes from their really rough stretch of 3 weeks of bad baseball had just completely gone away. So you looked at this weekend where the Mets were going to roll out Justin Hageman and Brandon Waddell as 2 of their 3 probable pitchers as their starting pitchers. And the other guy was Frankie Montas, who still isn't into a normal rhythm yet of his season, while the Yankees had a couple of really good arms in the second and third game of this series with, of course, Carlos Rodon, who we just watched not pitch very well on Saturday, and who we'll watch today on Sunday with Max Fried. And it looked like a series that the Mets were probably expected to lose. And I was just thinking, get a game. So when the Mets won the first game of the series and they scored a bunch of runs off of Marcus Stroman in the Yankees bullpen, it's like, all right, to me, if that's all the Mets got this weekend, I would have been okay with it. But Saturday was time to get greedy. You had a actual starting pitcher on the mound in Frankie Montas. Let's see what happens. And the Mets get out to an early lead, and we saw them win that game against the Brewers in the doubleheader thanks to an early grand slam by Brandon Nimmo. Once again, second time in 4 days, Brandon Nimmo hits an early grand slam that just sets everything in place. When you get that crooked number early, remember last year when the 2024 Mets just went on that great run, there was so many big first innings where the Mets would just come out like gangbusters and score 4 runs, and all of a sudden your starting pitcher can relax. Your starting pitcher can attack the zone. He can get deeper into the game. It just sets everything in line when you're playing ahead instead of coming from behind. It's so tough to push that boulder back up the mountain when you start off with that lead and you're rolling downhill. It just makes everything so much easier. In that first inning, yes, Nimmo got the big swing, but it was a collection of good at-bats. I'm going to stop criticizing Starling Marte in the leadoff spot. Carlos Mendoza maybe knows what he's doing. I'm not going to be critical anymore. I'm not going to be critical of David Stearns, who went into this weekend thinking that Justin Hageman and Brandon Waddell was a better strategy for winning this series and protecting the development of some of their top prospects with Nolan McLean and Brandon Sproat. And those 2 guys had good starts in AAA. And here the Mets are. They've won a series. So hands up. I was wrong. Decision makers in the Mets know what they're doing, and they've had a great weekend. But going back to that first inning, Marte doubles to lead things off. Francisco Lindor draws a walk. Juan Soto tries to drop a bunt to surprise the Yankees and load the bases for Pete Alonso. Instead, they end up making the play at first base, getting Soto out by a step, but it puts 2 runners in scoring position for Pete Alonso, still sets up a big inning, and with the lefty on deck and Brandon Nimmo, the left-handed Carlos Rodon pitched Pete Alonso very carefully put him on first base, and then Brandon Nimmo made him pay, gets a slider that was hanging a little bit on a 1-2 pitch, and he's able to take that ball that's a little bit on the outside and pull it to right center field, hit a grand slam. Nimmo's been unbelievable this year, particularly lately, and that big swing set everything in motion for the Mets. In the second inning, Jazz Chisholm gave a run and also gave his team a run and then gave it right back. So he hits a solo home run to get the Yankees on the board, but then he makes an error on a ground ball off the bat of Tyrone Taylor and throws it into the stands, which allows Tyrone to get second base. And then he was able to score on a base hit by Starling Marte. Went 2 for 3 from the leadoff spot. Great game by him. The Yankees got another run on a solo homer in the third off the bat of Austin Wells, but that was all Frankie Montas gave up through the first 5 innings. Just those 2 solo homers. He actually pitched really well. I'm going to talk about him more in the next segment. The line looks a little bit worse because he did give up a couple of runs in the 6th inning, but overall, I thought he did pitch a good game. The Mets were able to tack on a few before those runs came in the 6th. In the bottom of the 5th, Pete Alonso had a 2-run homer off of Rodon. Francisco Lindor scored the other run. He had gotten on base via a walk and had stole second, his 14th of the year, before Pete cashed him in with the homer. It was a fastball pretty much down the middle, and Pete knew what to do with it, 106 miles per hour off of the bat. So a blast by Pete Alonso. The Yankees get those runs in the 6th and then another in the 7th. So the Mets 7-2 lead ended up becoming a 7-5 lead. Got a little bit dicey for half of a second, but then in the bottom of the 7th inning, Ronnie Mauricio provided a spark, pinch hitting for Starling Marte, getting a lefty in there with a righty on the mound, and it worked out. A brilliant move by Carlos Mendoza. Mauricio hits a leadoff double. Francisco Lindor gets a base hit that scores Mauricio. An error by Trent Grisham allows Lindor to take the extra base, get into scoring position with first base open. The Yankees pitch carefully to Juan Soto, who actually fell behind in the count 1-2. But once they got ahead, they were trying to get Soto to chase, and he just won't chase. So he draws a walk. That puts 2 runners on for Pete Alonso, and Pete gets another fastball, this one on the first pitch, crushes this one 108 miles per hour off of the bat for a 3-run shot. So you have 5 RBIs by Pete Alonso, a multi-home run day. Nimmo with the 4 RBIs on the grand slam. And the Mets just had a field day. They tack on another insurance run in the 8th inning. Lindor doubled and scored on a base hit by Juan Soto, but that wasn't your typical single. It was nearly a home run. I don't know if it went off the wall or hit off the wall. And Soto maybe watching it a little bit, doesn't get to second base. Also probably didn't want to test Aaron Judge's arm. Also, it was whatever at that point, a 12-6 game. So we're not going to knock Soto for not hustling there. Just another great game for Soto at the plate. Lindor had a good game. Obviously, Nimmo and Alonzo, great games. Pete now is up to 20 home runs in the season. He's 6 away from Darryl Strawberry, getting closer and closer to that record. 73 RBIs on the season. He's just a few behind Seiya Suzuki for the MLB lead, who right now is holding that with 75 RBIs. So a great first half by Pete Alonso that should certainly result in an all-star appearance in a week here. Mets scored 12 runs on 10 hits. And one thing that was pointed out in the broadcast, the Yankees hit 3 home runs, but they were all solo shots. The Mets hit 3 home runs that had 9 runs attached to it, with a 3-run shot and the 2-run shot by Pete. And, of course, again, that grand slam by Nimmo. The Mets also went 6 for 9 with runners in scoring position. If you look at Nimmo over the last 30 games, he has been just unbelievable, hitting 300, 349 on base, 567 slug. We've got a 916 OPS over, again, a 30-game stretch. 9 home runs, 8 stolen bases, 17 runs scored, and 22 RBIs during that span. He is currently on pace for 32 home runs, which would be by far a career high for Brandon Nimmo, and 94 RBIs. I think the Mets have every chance of having 30 home run hitters this year. You know, Pete Alonso and Juan Soto are definitely going to get there, but it seems like Lindor and Nimmo certainly can as well. And I think if you look at this lineup right now and you see how these guys are producing, and obviously this is a little bit of a hot stretch, everything's going to look better in one of these runs where the team is putting up big game after big game. But I think when you are looking at the construction of this lineup, there are a lot of things the Mets have going for them. And when they were going through that bad stretch, it was harder to see that because Francisco Lindor was struggling. Now you've seen Lindor start to come alive this week. And here's the lineup following him, because as I've talked about, Francisco Lindor is the key to the ignition of this Mets lineup. Pete Alonso, we've seen what he can do all year. Juan Soto is back to being one of the best hitters on the planet. And Brandon Nimmo is really having good at-bats game over game over game. You could say the same thing about Jeff McNeil. I think there's 5 spots in a 9-man lineup that you feel really good about right now. Starling Marte seems to be a nice piece as your right-handed complement in a DH platoon. And I have every bit of confidence that Jesse Winker can fill the other half of that platoon. So when you look at what the Mets really need right now, it ultimately comes down to their young players, because the catcher position, they're not going to address it. Francisco Alvarez, we'll talk about him in the final segment. He hit another home run today. So Alvarez and Terens will be your tandem after the All-Star break, or pretty soon after it. And it's going to come down to Beatty, Mauricio, and Vientos, and figuring out if you can trust 2 of those guys or just one of those guys by the trade deadline. That's where the Mets are going to be at. And if the answer is 1, then they have to go out and get somebody. And right now, Mark Vientos had another bad game. It's a really tough spot, Vientos. We're going to be talking about this more and more as we inch closer to the deadline for All-Star break. I'm already planning it out. I have an entire week of deadline shows. So we're going to be able to talk about all these different things. But that's the one thing about this lineup right now. I don't think it needs to be overhauled. I don't think the Mets even necessarily have to make a move. I think they probably could stay internal and be fine. But really, I think it comes down to those 3 guys and figuring out, are you cool with Jeff McNeil in center and Brett Beatty at second with Vientos at third, or Brett Beatty at third with Mauricio at second, or some combination of the 3? Are you going to just lean into the youth, or is that the area where you have to add at third base, second base, or in center field to move Jeff McNeil back into the infield full time? That's where the Mets are going to be out this lineup, but you're seeing the upside in the ceiling, which is as high of a ceiling as pretty much any team has in baseball, because of those guys they have at the top of the lineup. A collection of 4 star-level players, which is really what the Mets have when you look at Lindor, Soto, Nimmo, and Alonzo. It's really good. And now that we're getting into these summer months, these are the guys that have to carry this team, and I'm glad they've done that this weekend to give the Mets a very impressive Subway Series win. Yes, the Yankees aren't playing great baseball right now, but it's still a tough team. It's still facing Aaron Judge 4 times in a game at least. It's still a winning organization that might not be in first place right now, but certainly has the expectation of being a first place team. And so you got to take these wins and be proud of them. So we'll see if the Mets can get the little cherry on top with a sweep. I want to talk about how Frankie Montas threw the ball in this one, and also we'll go through Carlos Mendoza's decision to pitch Edwin Diaz with a 6-run lead in the 9th inning. All of that coming up in just a minute. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Summer sports are in full swing, and whether you're all about baseball under the lights, golf on the green, or high-stakes soccer action, FanDuel is the best way to make every game even more exciting. You're already following the action. Why not make it even more thrilling? With FanDuel, you can get in on the game while your friends are getting sunburned on the beach. I've been using FanDuel to track all of my favorite matchups, and the app keeps it fresh with daily promotions and fun ways to bet. It's easy to use, fast to pay out, and makes even regular season games feel like must-watch events. I'm always looking at the home run props for a same-game parlay. Pete Alonso going yard with the Mets winning. It's just a fun way to watch a Mets game, and that is my typical bet. But if you're looking at the Sunday game here, Max Fried, a little bit tougher. I don't know if Pete's going to go yard in this one. I don't know if you want to take Juan Soto. Maybe instead you just look at Lindor and his hits on the game. You can go that way for a same game parlay, whatever it is. If you're new to FanDuel, new customers can bet just $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if your first bet wins. Open the FanDuel app today or visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. If you're watching on YouTube today, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button. Help us get closer to our next goal of 14,000 subscribers. I think we're about 250 away. I appreciate all of you who continue to subscribe. Now, like I said, if you look at the line, Frankie Montas pitched a lot better than what it would suggest, because you look at the final results, 5 2/3, gave up 4 runs. It's like, man, not the best start. ERA is still over 6, but if you actually watched it inning by inning, he was in control this entire game. His fastball hit 98. He averaged 96.5 miles per hour on it, so he's got great life on that fastball, on the sinker. We saw the splitter had way more bite to it than it has in his last couple starts. Once he locks that pitch in and he can really work north to south and play with hitters when it comes to that fastball compared to that splitter and be able to mess with eye levels, change speeds on them. He also has the slider, the cutter. There's a lot of weapons here that Montas can hone in on. And I just think that you see the ball of clay that the Mets invested $34 million in because he has a really live arm. And you can see him being dominant in stretches, certainly. And if he can put it all together, if the Mets were able to get Griffin Canning with some tweaks to his pitch usage to a consistent sub-4 ERA pitcher, even at times a sub-3 ERA pitcher, I think they can do a lot with Montas here in the second half. He didn't get a ton of whiff in this game, only 2 strikeouts, whiff percentage at 20%, so not quite getting that swing and miss just yet, but I think it's going to come once that splitter is even more locked in. I could really see a lot of whiff on that pitch, and he's also going to get more whiff on the fastball, and you have to also take into account he knew that the mission today, especially when he gets that 4-run lead in the first inning, is all right. My goal is to eat up as many innings as possible for this team. And yes, he didn't get through 6, but through the first 5 innings, again, all he gave up was a couple of solo homers. That's it. And he gives up 5 hits overall because in that 6th inning, he kind of got dinged and dunked a little bit. I mean, it was a leadoff single, not even a bad pitch, a slider on a 1-2 count that was off the plate. Good piece of hitting to reach out and get enough of it to find a hole. Next pitch was a sinker down. That one probably got a little bit too much plate, but it was below the zone. It wasn't like it was a sinker where he completely missed and a guy was able to put one in the seats. It was just, a sinker that was a little bit too much over the heart of the plate. Another base hit. Then Cody Bellinger gets him for a hustle double. It wasn't even hit hard. And it was a splitter that was down that Bellinger just must have been guessing splitter, honestly, because he nearly hit that ball off the ground, got enough of it, dumped it into left center field. And again, it was a hustle double, able to drive in both runs. And ultimately, that would be the end of the day for Montas. I think he got one more out after that before he was eventually pulled, as they didn't want him to face Jazz Chisholm again, who had homered off of him. So they went to Dickie Lovelady, and he got the final out of that 6th inning. But you look at the pitch count for Montas, 77 pitches, 56 of them were strikes. If he's able to get one more of those guys out instead of that slider that was hit, if that slider is swung through and he gets a strikeout there and he gets through that inning, maybe only giving up one more run, you never know. They might have been able to send him back out there to try to get some more, or even if not, he would have gotten you through 6 innings. So I thought this was a really good start to build off of for Montas. I think he's starting to shake off some of that rust. You have to remember, when any pitcher starts off coming out of spring training, usually it takes 3, 4, 5 starts for them really to be in rhythm. This was his 3rd start in the big leagues, or this season, obviously. So we'll see how it goes from here, but I thought there was a lot of good signs to take from this one. When it comes to how the Mets managed the end of this game, Dickie Lovelady again gets the final out of that 6th inning, stays on in the 7th. He got both the lefties out that he faced, but he did give up a solo homer to Anthony Volpe, and that obviously at that point in the game made things a little bit dicey at 7-5. The Mets go to Chris Devanski with 2 outs in the 7th. He gave up a base hit, but was able to get a comeback or two, get out of that 7th inning. That's when the Mets then had their big bottom of the 7th where they score the 4 runs. They still go to Ryan Stanek, though, in the 8th inning with a 6-run lead. And I think that one made more sense than the Edwin Diaz decision, just because you already got him loose. And at that point, you still need to get 6 outs. So you already got Stanek hot. You might as well just go to him and try to get through that inning, see if you tack on more runs, and then make your decision for the 9th. He does give up a run, Stanek does. He walks Aaron Judge, gets Cody Bellinger to hit a ground ball, but Bellinger too fast to be doubled up. He then throws a wild pitch that allows him to advance the 2nd, and then a double from Ben Rice brings home Bellinger. But then after walking Jazz Chisholm, he buckles down, gets a couple of strikeouts to get out of that 8th inning. The Mets tack on the run in the 9th to get things back to a 6-run lead, and yet Carlos Mendoza still goes to Edwin Diaz. Now, you could have made the argument that the Mets never should have gotten Edwin Diaz hot. They never should have gotten him up. But if I'm not mistaken, they got him up in the 8th inning when Ryan Stanek walked Chisholm, and that got a little bit dicey. So he was already up. He's already up and doing some throwing in the 9th. It makes sense to me that they pitched Edwin Diaz, even though just the optics of him going out there with a 6-run lead feels a little bit ridiculous when you don't have a lot of pitching for Sunday. But I kind of like just going for the juggler and getting the series win. When you go into a series with the pitching stacked up against the Mets, the odds, to have a series win in hand, why throw Zach Pop out there, whose last appearance he gave up 7 runs in the big leagues? Why throw him out there and even give the Yankees a shot? Like, just go to Diaz, put your foot down, get the victory, and you figure out Sunday on Sunday. Yes, Pop did start throwing in that bottom of the 8th inning, but it was after Soto got the hit, and Pete Alonso pretty much hit a double play ball right after that. He saw 3 pitches in the at-bat before he hit into a double play. So how much time did Pop have to get ready? You want to throw him out there and run the risk that he walks 2 guys and then you go to Edwin Diaz in a more high-stress inning, or you let Diaz pitch with the monster lead and just go through the motions, get the job done, finish off the series win, and then you see what happens on Sunday. So the Mets don't have a lot when it comes to their leverage arms. They're not going to have Stanek or Diaz available for the final game of this series, and you know what? All I would say to that is who cares? Who cares? Because guess what? If you told me going into this homestand that the Mets were going to win both series, sign me up. I would have taken that every single time. And if they end up having a clunker on Sunday, I really could care less because they've already proven what they needed to. They beat a good Brewers team that's playing good baseball. And yes, they beat a Yankees team that's not playing great baseball. Brandon Nimmo said it best at the end of this game that these are 2 teams that are at the end of a 15-round fight and they're just trying to throw punches. Both of these teams need an all-star break, and so I wouldn't read too much into this as far as, who's big brother, Yankees or Mets? I'm not having any of those conversations. But I like the Mets' resilience. I like the way the bats have showed up in this series. And now, sure, Sunday could be a mess, but the Mets are now in a really good position where they're going to have better pitching options this upcoming weekend. We're going to talk about that in the next segment here as Kodai Senga made his rehab start, could be his only rehab start. The Mets have a very good chance to win these final 2 series on the road and go into the All-Star break with an 8-4 stretch, and that's even if they lose on Sunday. So when you think about that, when you think about where this team was after the Pittsburgh series, where I was like, hey, win 5 of the final 12 games, then I'm fine, or if they can play 500 baseball, great. Now you look at where they're at, they're in a pretty good spot here to actually finish this first half strong, which is really impressive considering where things were, again, just 1 week ago. What I want to talk about to close out the show, though, is Kodai Senga's rehab start. Is he going to be ready to make one final start in the first half? We're going to talk about all of that in just a minute. If you're an everydayer that always tunes into the show, make sure you become a Locked On Mets insider. This is our texting service where you get updates from me anytime news breaks from the Mets. You can ask me questions anytime, take part in our Locked On Mets signed photo giveaways, and get the line graphics sent to your phone each day so it knows in the starting lineup without ever having to go on social media. If you want to be a Locked On Mets insider, find the link in the episode description or go to subtext.com/LockedOnMets. Before we talk about Senga, what did the Mets have in store for us on Sunday? What's the plan with this pitching staff? Well, Chris Devanski has been announced as the opener. Brandon Waddell will follow him as the bulk guy. If those 2 guys can get you at least 12 outs, that's a good start. I think best case scenario, 15 outs. Maybe Devanski has a quick first inning, can get you a 4th or a 5th out. Maybe Brandon Waddell is a little more economical and he's able to get you more than the 3 innings he's pitched in his last 2 appearances. But if you can get into the 5th inning with Waddell, that's a great first step. If you at least get through the first 4 innings with Waddell, you're off to a good enough start to try to finish that game. The good news is, the Mets, if things go sideways, they can just throw Rico Garcia and Zach Pop, who was finally added to the roster. As I talked about on yesterday's show, I figured he would replace Austin Warren. That's what happened. Austin Warren sent back down to Syracuse. To make room for Pop on the 40, Tyler Zuber was DFA'd. So that was just a couple of roster moves there, but when it comes to this game, again, you get through the 4th with Devanski and Waddell, maybe the 5th if you're lucky. You have Dickie Lovelady who can pitch in a spot against a lefty. I'm sure he'd be good to go. I'm telling you, you will not see Stanek. You will not see Diaz. But you could see Braziban and Garrett in the final 2 innings. The Mets have a chance to steal a game. But you got to remember, Max Fried's on the mound for the Yankees. And that's going to be a tough matchup for your Mets, even with how hot they've been swinging the bats over the last couple of days. So it's just see what happens. The fact is the Mets are going to play this game loose because it is a house money game. And if they can actually get on Fried early and their bullpen game trips up the Yankees, you never know what can happen. But I don't know if the Mets are going to go for the jugular until it's pretty clear that they're holding a lead with all of their guys that have to eat up a majority of these innings. If they can get into the 8th inning or a couple outs into the 7th inning with a chance, then you might see Braziban, coming into a spot in the 7th inning to maybe pitch out of a jam and then get some outs in the 8th. We'll see. I don't know if we're going to see Reed Garrett get 2 6-out saves in the same series either. So you have to be cognizant of that. It's not really a great game plan to win, but it's also a game, again, at this point where it's house money. It really is. So we'll see what happens with that. When it comes to the Mets rehabbing players in Syracuse, you had Jesse Winker in the lineup. He is now advanced up to AAA, where I think he'll probably spend the rest of this upcoming week. I don't know if the Mets are really going to activate him before the end of the first half. I think they're better off just letting Ronnie Mauricio soak up more at-bats before they eventually have to make a decision. It might still be to keep Mauricio and Winker comes back and to just option Travis Jankowski down and not have a speedster off the bench. You don't necessarily need one. So that might be the move for the Mets. We'll see. Again, conversations for other days. But Winker is getting closer, although he went 0 for 4 with a strikeout in this game. Francisco Alvarez homered again, though, as I mentioned earlier. Luis Angel Acuna went 1 for 3, scored a run on Alvarez's 2-run homer in the first. If you look at what Alvy's done down there lately, he started off 0 for 7 with 2 walks in his first 3 games. Over his last 7 games played, he's 8 for 27. That's a 296 batting average. He's got 4 home runs and a double. So he's definitely starting to swing a hot bat. I imagine they keep him down there for the rest of the first half, but I would think that you see both Winker and Alvarez back in the lineup on that first game out of the break against the Reds. I'd imagine both those guys should be good to go. Now, Kodai Senga could pitch this week. Started a game in AA, threw 68 pitches. Line's not the most pretty because he did give up 4 runs, 3 of them earned, and didn't make it through 4 innings. With that said, he pitched pretty well early on. First inning, struck out the first batter he faced. Then he issued a walk. Carson Benjamin an error on a fly ball. Then another walk loaded the bases. A sac fly scored a run. He then got another fly out to get out of that first inning jam. Second inning, Jacob Reimer made a throwing error, but Senga then got a couple of strikeouts, got a ground out to Clifford and had to cover first base, which was big. Did that no problem. Got through the second inning. Third inning, gave up an infield single, but it was still another scoreless frame. Picked up another strikeout. Fourth innings, when he ran out of gas a little bit, gave up a leadoff homer, a base hit, sac bunt, base hit, sac bunt, 2 more singles after that, and they pulled him at 68 pitches. So a rough fourth inning, but he came out of it, said he felt good, felt healthy. And if you look at where the Mets are at, I think it probably makes sense to still pitch him on Friday or Saturday in Kansas City. If he's good enough to go in a game as he just did and throw almost 70 pitches, and he can maybe build on that and get, let's just say he was supposed to throw about 60 through 68. If he's able to get to 75, 80 pitches from Kodai Senga is going to be more valuable than whatever else you're going to try to scrap together. And if you look at the week ahead, the Mets are pretty much set for the Baltimore series. You got Clay Holmes, you got David Peterson lined up for the first 2 games. You have an off day on Monday to rest that bullpen. You look at Thursday, I think Justin Hageman's probably going to make that start. They could go to Frankie Montas on 4 days rest, but I think they're probably better off having Hageman pitch on Thursday because then they can send him down, bring a fresh arm up for Friday if they want to go with Montas, or they can make Hageman the roster move for Kodai Senga. And if they go that route, then Senga's going to pitch on 5 days rest, and Montas would pitch on Saturday on 6 days rest, but you'd also break up the 2 rehabbing pitchers coming back for their first start off of injury. Senga coming off the hamstring, and Sean Manaea potentially coming off the oblique. He made actually oblique and now the elbow, but it seems like he's okay. He's going to make another rehab start on Tuesday if all goes well. he'll be lined up to pitch on Sunday. So if I had to guess how the Mets do it right now, my assumption is Hageman pitches on Thursday. It's one of Montas or Senga on Friday. The other one goes on Saturday, and Manaea closes it out. And you just sort of see how those guys pitch. But even taking 75 pitches from both of them, I think is probably more valuable than the alternative of doing what you've done in this series, which is just trying to figure it out with a bunch of bullpen arms and really bullpen games and openers and all these things, or having to again kick around the idea of calling up a prospect or going back to Jonathan Pintaro because he's a stretched out arm on the 40 that they could activate on Friday. I think it's just let these guys pitch. If they're healthy enough to pitch in games, which they both are at this point, let them go out there. You had Kodai Senga make his first rehab start in a playoff game last year. Yes, I know he didn't look great in the final inning, and he probably still has more things to work on with his command, but I think he can work on those things against big league competition. It's not like the Royals have the best of lineups, and Kauffman's a massive ballpark. So honestly, I don't really see the harm. Throw Tyrone Taylor out in the outfield to run down some fly balls and just see what happens. That's what I would do. And I think they're in line to do that with what Senga was able to do, which was throw almost 70 pitches. And that's really all that matters in these rehab starts. And if the Mets are able to get both of those guys on the mound this week, they're going to go into the second half knowing that they have a healthy starting rotation of David Peterson, Kodi Senga, Sean Manaea, Frankie Montas, and Clay Holmes. And the only reason why I put Peterson atop that rotation is because the Mets will play 6 games in a row out of the break before they have a day off. And if you started Kodai Senga on the first game, you'd have to insert a 6th starter. If you go with David Peterson, Peterson can start twice in that 6-game stretch, and you can roll with Senga on the other end of an off day after 5 days rest. The Mets are probably going to go with the 6-man rotation at points down the stretch with Senga, absolutely. And Paul Blackburn could be healthy as well. Not to mention, once you get through that first week, it'll be deadline week, and there's every chance the Mets make a move for a starting pitcher. But we will be talking a lot about the deadline coming up here next week. Again, I'm going to have 5 shows during the All-Star break that's going to systematically approach every aspect of this deadline. The starting pitchers, the bullpen arms, where they might find a bat, all those different things. What do the Mets have in the farm system that they should hold on to for sure, the untouchables? Which pieces should be put on the table? What should they be willing to give up at the deadline? So a lot of good stuff coming your way. I appreciate all of you for tuning in to a weekend edition of Locked On Mets. Or for those of you who are catching up on your past episode of Locked On Mets on the drive throughout your work week, I appreciate you all. I will go live after Sunday's game to recap the final game of this series, and you'll have a full edition of Locked On Mets on Monday talking about potentially some deadline stuff or just the road ahead with the final week left before we get to the break. As always, though, thank you for making Locked On Mets your first watch or your first listen every day. Now for your second watch or second listen, check out Locked On Sports Today, which is streaming 24/7 on YouTube. Locked On Sports Today is the first ever 24/7 streaming channel that covers everything in the world of sports with insight from all of our local experts as well as our league-wide experts. You can find Locked On Sports Today streaming 24/7 again on YouTube.